Hi, everyone, and welcome. Happy Thursday. Today's Thursday already. What a week it's been.
That's right. Welcome, welcome. We would love to hear who's joining us today. If you want to put that in the chat, we always love to know where everyone is coming from.
And I was super excited. I just want to let everyone know on one of our webinars Karen and I have done this week, I'm like, hey, you know what? This is one of the most exciting parts of the conversation is to see where people are joining from. We love to see names that are familiar. We love to see coast to coast participants. And so I couldn't help but think about the level of excitement and think about Buddy the Elf, especially given that it's December 2nd. So I was really excited to put Buddy's picture in there. And it looks like we already have participants dropping in the chat where they're joining us from, all the way from California. Welcome, Mary. And so we're excited to see who else is here.
Great. And if you are posting in the chat, you might want to go into that and select everyone versus just the host and panelists if you want other folks to see where you're coming from.
Karen, we have someone from Amy from Crown Point.
Right around the corner. I'm in Crown Point too. And I'll tell you what, when Megan said she wanted to put Buddy in the chat, I said, of course, because we are doubly excited today. When we hear from educators who are utilizing the resources, that is the best time of all. So we are so excited today to have some educators from across the country joining, and those sharing wonderful examples and all of what they're doing with both mCLASS and Amplify Reading.
Yeah, and you said it best, Karen. Like, the best way to hear about any program is through, educators who are using it, who have that experience with it, to be able to speak to it and what the real world of a school system or school looks like, and how that's really utilized. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're actually going to officially welcome you to this panel, right? What do educators have to say about mCLASS and Amplify Reading? I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name's Megan. I am actually from South Louisiana, and I am a former classroom educator. I spent most of my years in kindergarten, first and second grade, those foundational years where it's really impactful work to not only deliver high quality instruction that's really grounded in the science of reading, but also to be able to administer assessments that are identifying where your kids are. Are they at risk for reading failure early on? And if they are, what to do with that information. And so I'm excited to be here, and I'll turn it over to you, Karen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Venditti, and as you already heard, from Crown Point, Indiana. Before I say a little bit more about myself, we want to remind you that there are some tools at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button. We would love to have questions, and we know that that's one of the reasons you probably are here, to ask questions of Jennifer and Kim. And so we'd love to have your questions and type them in the Q&A. We love to get feedback in the chat too, things that you're thinking as our participants are sharing. So I just wanted to, I guess I wanted to be the little moderator, making sure we got that information out there. But as Megan said, we work with folks across the country utilizing high quality instructional resources. And this is the highlight of what we do, getting to work with educators and hear from educators. And Jennifer and Kim have a lot to share. So we're excited to have them here with us today.
Yeah, and that takes us over to Jennifer and Kim, and we're going to hear from them the majority of this presentation, of this discussion. So we'll briefly introduce them. Jennifer, if you want to wave. Jennifer is the K-5 ELA Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Specialist at Deer Valley Unified School District in Arizona. And we have Kim, I don't want to butcher your last name. Valentine, just making sure, who's the Assistant Director of Curriculum and Instruction from Jeffcoat Public Schools in Colorado. We're going to hear from them in just a second, and I tell you, we are so excited. But really where we want to kind of help you all understand where we're beginning with this is we have done so much work around the science of reading and really been a thought leader in that space. But when districts are really looking at their literacy system, what, more and more we're seeing every single day is educators who are saying, you know what, we know that in order for us to have a really complete literacy system, we need a strong assessment tool, we need a strong core instruction program, and we also need a way to differentiate our practice and instruction for students when they are out of reach from the teacher. But it has to be grounded in the science of reading research and this growing body of research that really identifies the way that the brain learns how to read. And Amplify has brought these key components together in our early literacy suite to ensure that teachers have what they need in a very accessible, easy way. So we're really going to dive into that. But mCLASS is where we're going to look at first today. And mCLASS is our universal literacy screener and also dyslexia screener that places students into small groups. So we'll identify that, but also places students in a personalized learning path and Amplify reading. mCLASS, if we do mention that today, is our core program that is grounded in reading science. It's a comprehensive program that is really, providing high quality instruction to both teachers and students to ensure that, we're meeting the needs of all of our students. But as I mentioned, mCLASS, which stands for Mobile Classroom, is the name of our platform that we administer DIBELS 8th edition assessments. And we're going to really dive into that. But when we talk about assessment, Karen is going to kind of expand on the power of mCLASS, and we'll hear from both Kim and Jennifer and what that's like for them and their teachers within their districts. But we'll also look at Amplify Reading on the second part of this call, which is our differentiated student-driven practice program that provides high quality instruction that's grounded in reading science when the teacher is out of reach. And it's super engaging. And I know Kim has a great engagement story for you all today as well. So I'll turn it over to Karen. And Karen, just, when we think about assessment, we just think about collecting of data. And then we have like the check mark thing, like, okay, we collected the data. But when we talk about mCLASS, we know it's so much more than that. So will you introduce just kind of the overview of what mCLASS does?
Definitely. And as Megan shared, mCLASS standing for Mobile Classroom. And I will say, just to give you a little bit of a background too, and I'm not going to say which one, Jennifer or Kim, but one of them mentioned, because I don't want to age anybody on the call, one of them mentioned using Palm Pilots, and that's where we started. So it's been over 20 years that we've been working with the system to bring teachers that ease of use in, as Megan mentioned, collecting data. But it's not just about collecting data, but we start with universal screening and progress monitoring with DIBELS 8th edition. And actually, this came up on the call yesterday too, Lectura, the K-6 Spanish language assessment system. But with that, you're going to get that dyslexia screening, as Megan mentioned. And the power, and I think both of our educators are going to be speaking to the goal setting ability and allowing teachers to really look at students and what's happening, setting goals for them, letting people understand, are we meeting the goals that we're setting? Are we on track? What kind of progress do we need to see? Then we're going to group kiddos and provide targeted instruction. And I know that's a really powerful piece too, in terms of time saving. So again, not just about assessing, but can we save time in providing that grouping and the instruction to go along with that. You also have other tools within the mCLASS platform, like an intensive intervention and text reading online, as well as math. But we're not going to hit upon those today. We just like people to know it's a really powerful platform and has a lot to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Karen, we're going to set the stage here. And I love the way that you introduce kind of, help participants who aren't familiar with mCLASS understand what this looks like in administering it.
Exactly. And we know there are different people on the call that may not be familiar with the administration. And so as you see, we've got a teacher who's using some kind of a device. And in this case, it's an iPad. It's really optimized for a touch screen. And the student has the probe in front of him or her. If it's something that needs to be read, if it's oral, they may not have that. But the teachers are getting great data in that platform, and administrators get that data, and that's where that goal setting happens, and the looking at the growth over time, as well as communicating to parents and caregivers. And so you're going to get all of that. And I know both Jennifer and Kim are going to talk about how those tools are utilized, and in one way, a really unique way too, in sharing some of the data virtually with caregivers. So it's very easy to use, and they'll talk about that. They may also talk about the measures. And so, if you're not familiar with the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, these are what you will be assessing, from letter naming to comprehension. And you can see that everything in between, and we know how important phonemic awareness is. And so we are going to work on all of those skills that really hit upon that word recognition in terms of those foundational skills and what it takes to become a proficient reader when you look at Goff and Tumner's work around that. And so 1 minute measures, the basic comprehension measure is actually a 3-minute measure, and it's done independently. Students do that independently. But other than that, you see the time 3 times a year. These are used for benchmarking. And then the same measures are actually used for progress monitoring, which makes it really easy for teachers to become familiar and know exactly what they're going to do. And they can be recommended measures based on the platform as well. You don't have to use the recommendations, but you can, and these will be the ones that are recommended.
Yeah, and Karen, thank you so much for going over these measures, because we know that these are critical skills that we're measuring. As we come off of COVID, really identifying where our kids are, and we're definitely going to jump into how important these measures are and really understanding where your kids are at, and also that composite score, identifying if they're on that path to proficiency. But enough from Karen and I. We're actually going to hear from our panelists today, who are going to kick us off through sharing their own stories. And I know that every educator on this call has a story, right? We all have experiences where we learn along the way, and there's no better opportunity to really learn about an assessment experience or data experience from other educators who have really come to learn about how to implement mCLASS Devil's 8th edition successfully. So we'll hear from you. Jennifer, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. So just a little bit about how we started the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my district previously, I see someone says they can't hear. Everybody else can hear me though? Okay. My district was using Devil's 8th in paper pencil form. And I work in a large district. We do have 31 schools and about 8, and we do our Devil's testing for our K3, and that's about 7,000 to 8,000 students there. And so we were working with the paper pencil pieces, which was very time consuming. And not only was it time consuming, but once testing was complete, we have testing assessment teams on each campus, a team of 5 that are highly trained to keep our testing tight with fidelity. And so it's reliable and valid. And that testing team would benchmark all of our students. Teachers would do the progress monitoring in their classrooms to have that data. But what was happening with those booklets were then, after testing time, going into a file cabinet. And nobody had access to see the error analysis and really plan for instruction using that data. We were just getting numbers. So we were being like 20% is at intensive, which gives us some information when we're building large tiered structures. But for instructional purposes, it gave us 0 information. And so sometimes there's blessings in big events like COVID. And one of our blessings was that it forced us to move away from that paper pencil into the online piece. So I was familiar with the online mobile, the mCLASS piece of being able to do it in a virtual or on a platform. So we were able to, once we were able to shift to that, because we were able to share that data with everyone. So now when a testing team, which we still have, test students, that data goes immediately into the teacher's dashboard. And then teachers have not only the access of the class summary, where they see all of how their class is looking at an overview, they have that individual student summary where they can click on the actual probes and see those error analysis. So we've put the power back in the classroom where the teachers can use that data. And it also allowed us to address our virtual population now, because that is a new reality. We were in Arizona back in person in October of 2021, so a little bit earlier than many other areas. So we did have that, but we still had the opportunity for families to choose virtual. And about 10% of our population chose to stay online and virtual. So we still need to reach those students. Paper pencil was extremely challenging. We had to move books here, there, and everywhere through different sites and figure out where kids were at, because they'd pop into virtual for a while, they'd pop back out into in-person, and there was a lot of movement depending on based on what the family needed during that challenging year. So the mCLASS now allows us to reach those kids. So if we have even brick and mortar students who are quarantined because of close exposure during assessment time, we can still test them. We just get on and we do a screen share. We do it over Zoom, and we're able to get that information. And then anybody can test that child on our testing team, and that data goes right into the teacher's dashboard. So that's been extremely powerful for us through these challenging years to get that data in the place that it needs to be. So we currently still have one online school. Very small percentage of our kids are now virtual. Almost a majority of them are in person. But even when we were in all virtual, 100% virtual school lockdowns, we were still able to test about 95, 96% of our population. So we did not miss out on that. Because we took, we revamped it to get it on, make sure we could Zoom. We had meetings with, we had teachers holding full Zoom classrooms. So they'd have their Zoom open time, and we would do breakout rooms where the testers were in the breakout rooms and the teachers would throw the kids into the breakout rooms to be tested. So it helped us catch almost every child. And then students who maybe didn't participate in the Zooms or show up, we made phone calls. And we sent emails with links and specific times for them to show up for their personal testing time. And we made sure we reached out at least 3 times to every family before we decided, this isn't going to work. But it was very successful. As you can see, we were a very high percentage. So not only were we able to get to those kids, but now we had data on kids that we weren't seeing every day. So we knew exactly where our holes were, and we knew exactly what was going to come back. So we were able to plan ahead because we saw those gaps happening in the virtual world, even though maybe that child didn't show up to their Zoom or was kind of hanging out in the background, maybe hidden a bit during that time period. So that was super helpful for us.
Well, Jennifer, I am so grateful you brought up the filing cabinet and the data, right? Like, we can administer these assessments, and we did that for years. Right. And then because I can totally relate to that, right? Like the booklets in the filing cabinet, and just the teacher time that it takes to really analyze an assessment, and not to mention time, but capacity. And we're going to get to that as well. But thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to dive in and expand on a lot of what you said here in a bit. But Kim, we'd love to hear from you now.
So I am the one who used the Palm Pilot, and actually we started with paper pencil back in the day when that was the only way that you could give then a Dibbles assessment. So back, oh my goodness, many years ago. And then we moved into using the Palm Pilot, which was revolutionary. However, the reports were still pretty limited at that point, but you could see the information online, which was fantastic. We moved into using the full platform, I want to say almost 10 years ago now. So we've used it since I think 2012 in our district. And we, if Jennifer, if you're in a large district, we're in a super large district because we have almost 100 elementary schools. And so we test K-3 about 25,000 students every benchmark. So what's really wonderful about that is just, for me, it's the instantaneous data that you can get on students. With the end of the year testing that most of us do, you don't get the results till the next school year. With Acadians, I get the results the next day or later on that day or immediately. And so our teachers, of course, at first it was like, what is this? 1 minute, really? 1 minute's going to tell me enough about a kid? And the more they began to use it, the more we analyzed it, the more that they could really see that Yeah, you really can learn a lot about a student by just from a 1-minute probe. Um, in my role, I've gone from being an ELA content specialist to more on the admin side now. Started as an instructional coach and teacher when I first started using it. Um, but really just watching teachers be able to know so much more about their students, especially with those foundational literacy skills, and to really be able to pinpoint, this is where I need to start teaching. So they're not guessing anymore. They really know what their students know and what their students need to know. And they're able to do that by analyzing the data. And then we're able to go in and help principals, instructional coaches, leadership teams look at what the school needs, and looking at it by school, looking at it by area, looking at it by the district, because you can pull Acadian's reports at any one of those levels and really be able to see that the picture of what's happening. And I will agree with Jennifer that when we went remote, there was a bit of a like, oh my gosh, are we going to be able to do this? And we usually get at about 96-97% is our typical completion rate. And when we were fully remote last year, we got 97% completion rate. And so it was really, and it's the only assessment that we did that with. Most of the other assessments had extremely lower completion rates, but teachers knew how to do it. The other thing I would say is that Amplify is a fantastic partner, and they provide you exactly what you need. And if you need something and you ask for it, more than likely you're going to get it. And so if you're missing something or you don't understand something, they'll get it to you. So the resources when we went fully remote were easily accessible and available to teachers, so they could do it in a variety of ways. They could send things home with parents, or they could have the parent print it off. They could share their screen. There were lots of different ways to do it. And as large as our district is, we used every capacity, truthfully. It happened in every way. And so that was really wonderful. But then we were able to meet with teachers remotely and analyze that data just like I was sitting around with them at the table, because I could pull it up, I could share my screen, I could take a look at it. And it really was pretty seamless when we moved into this remote setting. And now that we're back, we're really able to take a look at it and say, okay, here's where we were pre-pandemic, here's where we were during remote learning, and here's where we're at now. And that data is all there. And really be able to take a look at, okay, now what's next? Now what are our next steps? And through a lot of the resources that Amplify offers, and through the work of teachers, we've been able to do that. And it's really been, teachers really, I think even more now, see it as a help rather than something that they have to do.
All right. So Karen and I love everything about this. I want to jump in now because your stories are so powerful. And so you guys both of you ladies talked a lot about, COVID, right? Like remote assessment, and just really knowing the gaps, right? And something that really stuck out to both Karen and I yesterday during our call with Jennifer and Kim, there was so much that stuck out, but something that we really discussed with Jennifer specifically was the 3rd grade nonsense word fluency in mCLASS Civils 8th edition, and how powerful it is when it comes to those 3rd graders who were in 1st grade and phonics and missed a lot of phonics instruction and those types of things. And so, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to speak specifically to that measure, and then we're going to jump into all the great data and the ways that you both shared some phenomenal stories about how you are helping your teachers build capacity for analyzing data and how impactful that is just with the instruction that you're doing. So right now, I'll share my screen. And Jennifer, if you could just talk a little bit about what you shared with us yesterday in regards to this, we'd love to hear that.
So the beauty of the Dibble's eighth nonsense word fluency is that it incorporates the 6 syllable types, 5 of the 6 syllables in there. So, and multisyllabic, which was not present in the previous versions. So it really allows us to analyze the data and see exactly where on the phonics continuum the child is. And that way we can easily pick out where we will start teaching on that phonics continuum, or if there's a hole. Because with the, with the instability of virtual learning and coming back and forth, there are holes. And so we have to see that. And mask wearing. The mask wearing was very challenging for, there's a little diversion, but for phonemic awareness and for phonics, because students could not see our mouths. And that was such a huge point of that. And we can't see if the student is producing the sounds correctly as well. So that was a challenge. But what we've done in here is that we encourage the teachers to go through this probe after students take it. And we're looking for a couple things. One, we're looking for blending. If students are blending or code recoding. And another thing we're looking for is where in the syllable types are students mastered and have in automaticity. For example, in first and second grade, when you get a couple of rows into that score, to that probe, they start switching to silent E. And that's where you really know if that child has internalized that skill, because if a child is showing you in isolation that they're reading silent E in some of your instruction, but in context and in this particular assessment, all of a sudden they are reading in closed syllables or short vowels, and they just keep it going. They don't see the difference and they're not discriminating. So that was super powerful information to us. Are children able to code switch? Have they internalized this skill to the point of automaticity, or have they just mastered the skill in isolation? And that changes our instruction on how we deliver it and how we continue to move with that. So the third grade one goes all the way through. It has the silent E, it has the R controlled, it goes into beginning and ending blends, as well as predictable and unpredictable vowels, teams, and 2 syllables. So it really opened our eyes up to be able to go through. And when we look at those individual, because it's now in the teacher dashboard, we pull together after a benchmarking time and we have them click through them right on their laptop and look at those and start just taking notes. What do I see as common threads? So what is my whole class working on? Now that's my tier 1 that I need to work on. Where do we need to work on in tier 1? And what do pockets have? And those are my tier 2 or tier 3 kids. And I can group them appropriately based on skill. Because the most important thing to know when looking at this, the score, what Megan has up right now, is if you go down to the student piece, I can see that I have a handful of kids. Can you sort them by composite for me real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. So if I sort by composite, I can see easily that who my intensive and strategic kids are. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I can just group those kids, because they're going to have very different strengths and weaknesses as far as the targeted skills. So then I can go deeper and click on any of those probes to determine, and I can see it in a color-coded view of where they're at. Like I can look at this kid and I know this child's accurate with their letter sounds, they're slow and they're not blending. I have all that immediately. And so I can just glance at any of these. So front loading this information with teachers. Oh, if you click on that one again, you can quickly see that you've got some vowel issues. You've got reversals, most likely with B's and D's, and you have a child that's not blending yet. So that's what's so powerful about these, is it's not just the child was an intensive or the child was a 12. Those numbers really don't mean a whole lot to us. It's that the child can't blend yet. And that's what I need to teach. Or the child still has reversals or short vowel problems or long vowel problems. And I can work specifically to correct those gaps in learning and work along the continuum of the phonics and PA continuums. So those have been built into our structures and our protocols at our schools, that after benchmark times, we have these meetings, these data dialogues, where we're going to look at the data and make those instructional decisions. Because if we're going to test and not look at the results, we might as well not test. There's no reason.
Yeah. And I love that you shared that with us yesterday. Because I'm sure educators even on this call can relate to that, right? Like we collect the data that we're required to collect. And maybe it's that we don't have a tool that makes it this easy for us to access that data, right? To have that instant reporting at the skill level, being able to pull up these digital probes. We talked about, paper booklets, right? Having to carry those through, those being in the filing cabinet. And this really makes it accessible, no matter if teachers are administering it or if an assessment team is, like you all shared, for teachers to be able to access this right then and there. And also, Kim, you shared something about the analyzation of these probes yesterday with us that was really powerful as well. So if you want to share that, that was really something we loved hearing about.
Yeah, I think if I remember which story you're talking about, I think I do. So nonsense word fluency probably is one of the ones, and if you've given Acadians, this, or Dibbles 8, that nonsense word fluency is one of the most important, because students go from just segmenting all the way to just blending, but there are a lot of steps in between there. And so we really want to move teachers beyond just looking at the score and the color, because those don't always tell the same story. And so you can see that sometimes kids will have, you go from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, and you're looking at, especially with correct letter sounds, a student's score may actually go down. And that's because they're beginning to move into blending. And when they move into blending, sometimes they go slower because they're segmenting in their head. So this is a great example of one where this student is beginning to blend some, segmenting and blending together some, and then still just segmenting some words. This student's score probably went down a little bit because it's going to take them longer when they're doing both the segmenting and the blending. But this student's literacy skills have improved. And so we really have to encourage teachers to get in and look at it at, we call it the probe level, and look at it at the probe level and see what the student is doing. And I know that we have some things where we think about them in quadrants. And so I didn't tell Megan or Karen this yesterday because I thought of it afterwards. But we use a document where we put kids in quadrants. So we put kids who just segment, and then kids who are already blending, and then kids who primarily segment but might be blending a little bit, and kids who are blending but still segmenting a little bit, because those kids all have very different skills, but you're not going to know that necessarily by just looking at the score. So with Acadians, in Dibbles 8, one of the next great things that you can do is look at it at the probe level. And anytime you click on that score, you're going to be able to see how the student performed. And it's really, really critical that we do that with kiddos, especially our kiddos that are still struggling.
Kim, those are really great points. I love the story about looking at the probe and seeing what is really changing across time. That brings up, a couple of things both you and Jennifer brought up yesterday. Two things you mentioned about putting your kids in quadrants, and we could talk about, the grouping and instruction. That's one thing I'd love to hear from both of you about. But even before that, I think these both go hand in hand though too, is the teacher capacity, building teacher capacity on how do we help teachers know those things like you shared, Kim, that this is a process. These are stages that kids may go through, and you're seeing the groups of kids doing these things. So I'd love to have you speak to that. And then Jennifer also, because you both shared so much about it's hard when we've got turnover at this time, because we know our turnover is getting worse in education. And so I'd love to hear from both of you on those topics as well.
You can go first, Jennifer, since I've been talking.
So let me just make sure I understand the question of discussing how we were building capacity within the teachers.
Sure.
Yeah. So, okay. So we have the structure in our district is we do have district literacy coaches who work underneath me and who are deployed to our sites. So we look at this data too as a district, and we drill down. We each have a handful of schools that we do the same process. We're either drilling down and looking at probes while we're doing data dialogues with the schools in the grade levels, like sitting with them. And we're constantly embedding that PD in there. So we may come to a data dialogue with a particular probe in mind to highlight How do we read this probe? What are the strengths and weaknesses that the child is exhibiting it? And then we wrap back into our knowledge base of the phonics and PA continuums and decide where the child is on that continuum and where we need to go next with them. So that's constant ongoing PD that we offer, an isolated PD through either virtual Zoom PD or in-person PD, or we have like a coaching plans with groups. So if we have, for example, an entire new third grade team, which is very common to have brand new baby third grade teachers, and we want to make sure they're supported. It's a lot of information that coming straight out of the universities that they just haven't had time to pack into their toolkit. So we want to make sure that's embedded, and mCLASS allows us to do that a couple of ways. One is from being able to learn how to read the probes and see how it connects to the continuum. But we didn't talk about this quite yet, but might be jumping ahead. But the instructional pieces that are in the grouping that's available in mCLASS. Is this a good time to kind of segue into that groups?
Yeah, and I love what you talk about with your like yesterday you shared with your your novice teachers, right? Like this is actually like, it's so overwhelming to come into the classroom as a newbie and not just with your core instruction, but really have the tools.
The target.
The baseline, like this is where you can begin. And mCLASS does that so effortlessly for teachers. And the way that you are using this as a tool to really build teacher capacity, whether you've been teaching for 30 days or 5 years or 20 years, having that baseline for the data discussions, I think is so impactful in what you shared and what you are currently in the process of sharing. And so that is something that even as a former classroom teacher, what a privilege or a benefit as administrators to be able to hand your teachers this tool and guide those rich data conversations. Right. And so that is a great segue into that instruction piece. But Kim, did you have anything else to add about just looking at the data and like even just y'all's process for analyzing the data?
One thing I would say is yes to everything that Jennifer just said. It's very similar to what we do too. We have instructional coaches. I have a team of teachers, teachers on special assignment that go out and work with schools. So it's a very similar process. What I would say is when you're getting started with teachers, just start with 1 or 2 kids. Think about those kiddos that are really just the ones that you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about, and you're like, oh, why can't this kiddo learn how to read? What is stopping this kiddo from learning how to read? That's the kiddo we want to dig deep on and go in and really dig deep and start at the benchmark level. Take a look at their benchmark scores and then dig down even into their progress monitoring, because progress monitoring can really show you, is what I'm doing on a daily basis working? Am I seeing their scores increasing, or am I seeing their scores stay flat? And if we see scores stay flat to more than 2 or 3 times in between progress monitors, we need to change it up because what we're doing is not working. So start small and start with 1 or 2 kids and really dig deep. Look at every single probe. Look at all the progress monitors and what are you noticing about how their responses are changing over time. Yeah. And so that's really critical, but you can't take that on with a whole group because it's just too much. It's too overwhelming to do. So start small and just start with 1 or 2 kids.
I agree with that, Kim.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one thing with that was the residual effect happens too. Once they focus on that, then once they start building the capacity of understanding it, then they start seeing it in other students, and then the other students get that residual benefit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What you just said is, you said it so much better than I could have ever said it, by the way, both of you. But what y'all are saying is like, you're saying, look, once you can analyze those probes, but when we look at even what mCLASS can do and going to the instruction tab, and I think that's where Jennifer was headed next with that, is even at the student level, if I'm picking 1 or 2 students here, I can have like this next step solution. So really the game changes for teachers in that we not only have the rich data conversations of what their skills deficiencies are, but we're providing teachers with a baseline solution as well, right? And you mentioned progress monitoring, Kim, and we're definitely going to head there for sure, because that's so important when you said, how do I know if my remediation instruction is effective? But, you know, starting with one kid, looking at the response patterns, right? Having that baseline, is this measuring up, or is this aligning with what you're noticing in the probe, even for that analyzation, and giving teachers a direction with that. But Jennifer, I know that you were going to dive into really that small group instruction piece of this, so I'm excited to hear where you're going.
Yes. So if you could click on groups just on the left there. Yeah. So this is another way we can build that capacity with our new teachers, and also confirm and affirm for our veteran teachers. So this portion of mCLASS does take the deep metrics analysis of the probes that students are tested on, and groups them in strengths and weaknesses. So what we'll do is we will go through the probe analysis for each student or our class in one data meeting, and then we bring them here and say, this is how mCLASS is recommending to group your students and what specific skills that they need to be working on. It'll tell them what they can do and what they need to work on, and then give the additional activities to teach, which are built on a gradual release model and are scripted and have word lists and probes attached to them. So teachers don't need to take that time. You know, if you've ever had to build a word list, you stick with like the same 6 words. You just can't think of anything else. Like the only 6 words you can think of in the and family. You can't come up with anything else. So this is a time saver. It's not only a time saver, but it's high quality, rigorous intervention, which you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. And especially for our new teachers who may not have that knowledge yet. I use the word yet, bold-faced and underlined, because then they start learning it, and then they can start making it their own and applying it in other areas and wrapping in other kids. So these lessons are key. So we recommend to our newer teachers to stick with the groupings that mCLASS is recommending, and then have those thoughts and conversations and reflections about when you're working with kids, because ultimately the teacher knows the student the best. So you can look at those and you will know, you know what, I see why Amplify or mCLASS put the child here, but I know more about this kid. So I know that this is not the best group for this child, and I'm going to move them to another one. So that fine tuning is definitely encouraged by all the information and other data points that we know about that student. So we do have those conversations, but it's a great jumping off point. It doesn't waste time. So we can start groups like that. We test, the next day we have our groups. We're going to start intervention the next day. We're not wasting a week or two trying to figure out who's in what group and what am I going to teach during that time. So this has been very powerful for us as well. And especially in addition, many of us are struggling with vacancies, and we are so thankful for our long-term subs who are stepping up and doing this for us. And they need all the support they can get. So this also encourages and gives them the tools they need, so our students don't, or I should say our students continue to benefit from good instruction, even in a situation that may not be ideal.
And Jennifer, you know, you bring up instruction, which obviously with these activities, that's where we're headed. We also talked yesterday, both of you, about what does this help us do in looking at this health of the system, the overall system that we have in place, and looking at our core instruction, because basically we know that that's measuring what we're doing in the core as well. So I'd love to hear from both of you about what happens when you look at the data and then you go back and look at the core, and are we making any decisions based on what we see from the results and what's happening, and how do these activities play into that core instruction as well? So maybe Kim, if you want to start with that.
I do want to go back and say one thing about instruction before I jump into that next question. And that's one thing that we really have discovered, and one thing that really helped with our 2nd and 3rd grade teachers was realizing that not every student in 2nd and 3rd grade needed fluency work, that many of the students need to go back and get more work done in their phonics and even phonemic awareness. And they didn't realize that the reason that kids were reading slow was not because they needed to increase their fluency. Yes, they do, but the underlying cause of that fluency was because they did not have a good handle on their phonics. And so I just wanted to put that in there, and you really can see that when you go into the Now What tools or the instructional tab and take a look at all of that. It will really show that. So I wanted to put that in there before I moved on to the next question. But along with core, I know one of the things that we really saw in our district in Colorado, we're very much a site-based, come from the basis of every school makes very high site-based decisions. And so we didn't really have a cohesive core across all of our schools. However, in the last few years, we've noticed that our data has been very flat. And so because of having that Acadians data, we were able to say, you know what, our data is flat. This is not working. And through progress monitoring of the system, now we are beginning the process of implementing a district-wide core resource. And it really was because of having that long-term, being able to see over time what our data had been doing or not doing, that we were able to make that decision.
Okay. Jennifer, we'd love to hear from you too as well about how, because I know you actually mentioned to us that you were adding things to the core, looking at the core, that because it may not have met the needs of the instruction that you determined your kids needed.
Absolutely. And so when we do see those, and Kim brought up exactly the point too, about how the fluency, sometimes we get stuck in fluency. We need to back up. We need to go slow to go fast, back and fill those pieces and make them solid. So what we noticed is that maybe it's as she said, the same thing. Our core, our tier 1 curriculum may not be hitting it if we see this as a systemic problem across our district. So what we've done is, using the science of reading and the methodologies and the research behind it, of pulling in those high yield strategies for our phonics and phonological awareness instruction and creating some of our own curriculum to supplement it. So for example, pacing, our current core curriculum didn't quite meet the demands that we needed for pacing for phonological awareness in our kindergarten program. And as you know, when you adopt a big, large program, it's very strong in some areas and maybe not so strong in others. So we had to support and supplement on those. So what we've done is we've looked at this data over time and see where our kids tend to not grow as much as we'd like them to, or where they seem to have higher inaccuracies. And we've supplemented those, and we push that curriculum out. We build that at the district level, and then we push it out and train teachers throughout the district. And we can train them either through, we create online Canvas courses, training. We have online Zoom meetings, we have in person, and we have coaches on the ground working one-on-one or with teams and modeling in classrooms. So showing that. And then you do see those results in the data, especially the progress monitoring data, where you're measuring in small increments of growth and making sure that it's working. So that progress monitoring is such a key point. And if you were doing any research on progress monitoring, you'll find that schools that have fidelity in their progress monitoring schedules and do it with fidelity are going to have an extreme amount of growth compared to schools that don't. And this is an often overlooked gem in the whole MTSS system, but this is a key component. We have to know, and one of you said it earlier, what are we doing? Is it working? Because I don't want to sit there and intervene for 6 weeks on something that's not working and lose 6 weeks. And now we're even further behind. So this is my roadmap. Am I on the right street getting there, point A to point B the quickest way? Or did I take a left turn and now I'm going down to a dead end street and I can't get out? So this is key to continue to watch these. And the graphs in here are key for quick visuals too, to make sure we can see that. Yep.
I do have a question about this, and we didn't talk about this with either of you yesterday, but I know that mCLASS Dibbles 8th edition recommends one measure to progress monitor students on, right? And it would be that earliest point of deficiency or wherever that skill gap is. I'm sure I can even kind of bring this back to myself and be vulnerable in the way of, look, I was teaching first grade. I was administering paper pencil dibbles and not having the capacity for understanding all of the, like how I should be, if I'm remediating phonemic awareness, that's what I need to be progress monitoring, right? And so even that alone, when teachers, like you said, start to realize the pattern of this, of the instruction, that really helps build capacity for that. And so what you're seeing here on this dashboard is that progress monitoring measure that mCLASS is recommending. And teachers obviously do have the opportunity to progress monitor other measures or even below grade level measures. And so we see this aim line, and I know paper pencil users, this is like plotting the graph, the ruler. I know I had all my colored pens, right? But from here, one thing we did talk about was, is this effective? We don't want to, like you said, Jen, we don't want to waste 6 weeks of time with students. Time is invaluable, especially now, right? We're already behind, playing catch up in so many ways. But something that was definitely shared yesterday by Kim is really looking at the goal setting for teachers. And when we talk about goal setting, something that, you know, we say teachers are coming in, you have this fresh group of kids, and let me look at how effective you are as a teacher. How are you moving the needle forward for your kids? And so one thing when we look at what we call zones of growth in Dibble's 8th edition is how we, you know, as teachers we're asked, are kids making adequate progress? And are you effective as an educator? Those two big questions. And without having a resource to really guide you in making that informed or educated decision of both, it's kind of just like playing roulette, right? And so I guess, Kim, you spoke about this yesterday, and Jen, we're going to hear from you next. But Kim, we'd love to hear about what you shared yesterday with this.
Yeah, so in Colorado, we have a state law where teachers have to have an educator effectiveness goal. And I'm sure lots of you have something similar to this. And many of our teachers have started using the goal setting tool within the system to set their goals. And what it has really done, one, it's shown teachers that many times kids are not going to move from a very solid red composite score to a green score within a school year. It's just not going to happen because they're just too far behind. And so it helps teachers realize that when they can set a goal that the student moves well from the bottom of red to the top of red, that's a huge amount of growth, and that they can make well above average growth by doing that. And so one, it helps teachers understand and set those reasonable goals, but it also, when you hear that kind of that heart attack assessment of, well, I think they're doing okay. And then you go in and you pull the growth and you say, it's below typical. We can't have below typical growth. And so that goal setting is so powerful. And our teachers this year, because it was so hard to set goals, it's like we don't know what kids had last year, really. We don't know how engaged they were last year. How can we set these goals? And I've talked with principals and we have community superintendents in our district and teachers, and have really encouraged them to use this goal setting tool because it levels the playing field. It becomes about growth instead of about achievement. And that we're really wanting kids to make that high growth so that they're moving in a way that's going to get them where we want them to be. It may take more than 1 year, but it's going to allow them to see that they've made that high growth.
Yeah, it's so important what you just shared. And so just to kind of put this, give participants a visual, what you're saying is that teachers have a way to say, okay, for example, Leah Crane. Well, she started out with BOI. She's really below, but is Leah Crane, does she have some type of disability? Are we going to have to refer her down the road? Also, is it just that she has a lack of exposure? Let's really look at what happens if she makes a well above average growth with even letter naming fluency or phonemic segmentation fluency. We still see she's not going to benchmark. That doesn't mean, right, that Leah Crane needs to be referred for services immediately or all those things, right? And so when you talk about, it really is telling us that growth measure. This is what you're saying. The growth for Leah Crane specifically if I look at how she's grown here, I can see she's actually, even though she wasn't projected to benchmark, even with letter naming fluency, she's made well above average progress. That means the teacher's remediation instruction is truly effective. The teacher can continue to do what she's doing, but also Leah Crane is well on the path to catching up here. Yes, we have some work to go, but this is absolutely an opportunity to celebrate her hard work and progress. And so, Jennifer, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation about really this progress monitoring and goal setting opportunity?
No, I agree 100% with what Kim said, is that teachers need to know that they are making an impact, a positive impact, and that's a great way to see it. Just because they're not green doesn't mean the child has had an unsuccessful year. They could have had a stellar year, depending on where they saw it. And it also confirms what a teacher is doing. We all know, as someone said earlier, that child you think about in the middle of the night. I'm still thinking about kids I educated 20 years ago and worry about them. And they stick with you for life, and we all want the best for every kid. And so this is a really good place to have that realistic goal and know what we're doing is good for kids and that they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And what we're going to actually do here is look at Amplify reading now. You all both have talked about looking at, small group instruction, really providing targeted remediation. And I know Karen and I always come back to Amplify reading, and Karen was the brilliant mind that whenever her and I were talking about Amplify reading, when we first joined the Amplify team, it was like, holy moly, this is like effortless differentiation for teachers, right? Teachers do nothing. And so Karen, if you want to expand on that before we jump in and then turn it over to them, please do.
Well, we didn't say teachers do nothing. We said teachers don't have to do anything.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry if I said that. Yeah, definitely. Teachers don't have to do anything to provide that. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and I think we also, I've talked to folks about it and said, it's progress monitoring without stealing instructional time. That's what I like to hear. And I know our call is coming to an end, and I'm leaving definite time for Kim to share a story about Amplify reading, because I think that says it all much more than I could say very eloquently. So Kim, if you want to just jump in with the personalized path.
So the first year that we used Amplify reading was in the summer of, this is 21. I get so confused on time, but it was the summer that we were fully remote. We did a summer school that was fully remote. And I was like, wow, we have to have something that teachers can have kids do at home while they do small groups, because we were doing synchronous learning remotely. And so Karen, our account manager, who's also named Karen, had been telling me a little bit about Amplify reading, and I'm like, okay, tell me some more. And so we decided to adopt it for our summer school program. We had about 500 kids, which was about half as many as we usually had, but we thought, okay, we're fully remote. I'm really glad for those 500 kids. So we get started, we get all the usernames and passwords out, everything's going great. Day 3. The system went down. Doesn't ever happen. I do want to say that, but it did. Day 3, my phone and my email blew up, and they were like, oh my God, Amplify reading is down. My kid wants to play Amplify reading. Where's Amplify reading? We can't log in. Parents are calling, teachers are calling, because parents are calling them. It was bedlam. And I'm like, okay. And we got it back up by the next day, but I'm like, wow. How engaging is this program if on day 3, students are losing their minds that they can't get logged in? So that was my real indication very early on that this was a good program. And there are so many good things about it. The parental involvement that's involved in it, where kids can do it at home and can do it at school. The ability to look at this is my favorite report right here, because I can see where I can pull small groups. I can also see where I might have some core instruction, because if everyone is orange, those are typically below grade level. Well, if everybody's falling in that, wow, we better do that as core. If it's just a couple of kids, maybe I can pull them together in just a small group, an instructional group. And then I can look at usage. And I can see how many minutes kids have been put on. The trouble spots are great because those are things, again, they're kind of like those games and activities that you see in on Acadians or Dibbles 8, where you're given those same kind of types of games that either you could do at the beginning of a guided reading group, a para could pull them, you could send them home, or kids eventually can do these independently. It just gives you that full complement, I guess I would say.
And I just have to say too, with Jennifer had a similar story, and maybe you want to share. The problem isn't under usage. It's right, Jennifer, if you want to share a little bit about that.
We're having an over usage. Our kids love it. And they're doing it so much at home without even being asked, that we're having to have teachers look at their usage reports. And if kids are using it excessively at home, we're saying maybe they need to be doing other types of activities when they're in school that maybe are more collaborative with other people. So we're trying to we're finding that balance right now, but that's I would rather have that problem than, begging people to get on. And then the other thing is, just this morning, I was meeting with a 3rd grade team, and I always ask a team when we're in person, the last question I always ask them is how's Amplify reading going? Because this is our first year where we've done it K-5. We've had pockets throughout the years. And they said, oh my gosh, we love it. And they said, the kids love it. They said, the neatest thing is when we're teaching Tier 1 curriculum, they'll raise their hand and go, I just learned that in Amplify reading, and they use this strategy. And they're like, yes. And so they're being able to make, kids are really internalizing them and making those connections, and they enjoy it enough that they're excited to be on. So we're very pleased with it. It's making an impact for sure.
Yeah, what you just said about kids loving it, both of you, is, that is, it's one thing, to ensure that kids are really doing like the learning portion of that when they're working independently, right? And so when the teacher is out of reach, we want to make sure that they have high quality instruction and practice that's really personalized to them. And what better way to do that than with Amplify reading? One last thing, you mentioned that was 3rd grade teachers, but yesterday when we talked, Jennifer, or maybe it was Kim, I can't remember, y'all's conversations were so similar. And I was like, wow, this is so powerful because they have such great things to share. But, thinking about 4th and 5th grade teachers, and as kids move along in these grade levels, we know that, the 4th and 5th grade teachers, when it comes to foundational skills, while we may have 4th and 5th grade teachers who have that really knowledge base to provide really targeted remediation that follows what we know about how the sequential order of skills and what we know about how the brain learns how to read. But more importantly, something that was shared yesterday and was even just mentioned on this call is, these trouble spots are really where kids are getting stuck on these skills. So you may have a 4th or 5th grader who is getting stuck on a foundational skill that's from 1st grade, right? And so 4th and 5th grade teachers can even build capacity for how to remediate those skills as well. So I don't remember which one of you was talking about how teachers can actually go into that and how they use those even in a small group setting. But whoever wants to share about that, and then we'll move on to the last, we'll wrap up here.
I think that was me, that our 4th and 5th grade teachers, since we don't use Dibbles to place them in the program, they don't have that Dibbles data. They use Amplify reading a lot, and they are able to see those trouble spots as a whole group and as an individual small group, and pull those lessons in the resource library to be able to teach skills that are scripted and high quality that, like you said, they may not have the knowledge of yet. Just due to their previous training, because often they are not trained in early foundational skills because of their grade level.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And I know we are right at time. Kim, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I just think that's so true. And I think it gives them practice on those skills, even if the teachers don't have, because many times it's not even so much that they don't have the ability, they don't have the resources in their rooms. And so this gives them the resources. And again, with those tools that they can pull up, it gives them things that they can do with those kiddos. It's readily available.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much. And we want to make sure that we do share, if you are interested in learning more about either Amplify Reading or mCLASS, you can take a screenshot of this and go access these websites and continue to learn more. And I know, Karen, you said we had a question.
We did have one question earlier that we didn't get to, and I don't know if our panelists need to leave. I know that meetings are tight. If the question was, how are you testing ELL students remotely? And I don't know if either of you want to address that. Have time. We'd love to.
We tested our ELLs the same way that we tested every other student. Again, because there's so many different options on how you can provide the parents materials, even if parents were primarily Spanish speaking, the directions, I believe, were in Spanish, if I remember correctly. And so you could send those home so they understood that this was a testing situation. We did send home a letter that we wrote and we had it translated in 4 different languages. I think we had it translated in Spanish, Vietnamese, Russian, and Hmong maybe. And so we had that available so parents understood that this would be testing, not to help them. And then we shared the screens primarily. So it really wasn't that different.
I agree. We didn't have as many translated, but we didn't have any problems with reaching out. And we, as a case by case, if there was a specific, we wrapped in our EL department or our translators in the district and utilized them as needed. But overall, it was exactly the same as any other child. Yeah. And the participation rate was just as good.
Mm-hmm. And I know the question is, how can tutors get the materials? The materials are available online. I put in the site in the chat a link to the remote guidance for mCLASS, and that will really tons of information and videos and ideas and letters, as Kim shared. All of that is on that site. So exploring that to get those resources is something we'd recommend. Yep. All right. And I know Megan's got our last slide up there. If you're interested, as the folks discussed, high quality instructional materials are really important in this time, and looking at a tool to do that. We're going to talk with CKLA teachers, Core Knowledge Language Arts, who are using those materials to support kiddos in this kind of crazy time. And so we'd love to have you come and hear from them. We love hearing from our educators, and Kim and Jennifer, can't thank you enough. This has been phenomenal.
Thanks.
Yeah, Karen.
Thanks for having us. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And until next time, hopefully our participants join us for our core instruction, but our panelists today were top notch, and we are so grateful for you sharing your story. So thank you again, and thank you everyone who is on the call and choosing to spend your time with us. And we hope to see you on Thursday.